Hello, and welcome to the P2 and P3 Lighting Panel Boards Overview Brain Chart. Today we'll be covering the details of two of our most flexible lighting panel boards that we offer here at Siemens. First, a little bit about what we'll be covering today. We'll start off with a general intro to what exactly a P2 and P3 panel board are, and then explain how they fit inside of the Siemens portfolio. Then we'll go into detail on each individual panel board, the P2 and then the P3. We'll follow that up with some of the major selling features we want to hit on and other details about both of these panel boards. And then finally we'll wrap up with some support information if you would like more details on these panel boards. So what exactly are P2 and P3 panel boards? Well, they are lighting and appliance panel boards, in particular some of the most versatile of all of the Siemens panel boards that we offer, and they are typically used in commercial applications, in specifically instances where you may need to mix and match your branch breaker frames, or you need to meet more demanding lighting panel specifications than you can meet with our P1 panel board. Now, let's see how these P2 and P3 panel boards fit into a typical electrical distribution system. To do this, we'll step through an example where a customer may have medium voltage switchgear on site. In this situation, that medium voltage switchgear will take in the utility power and then feed a transformer. That transformer will then take that medium voltage and step it down to a much more manageable low voltage, which in the United States is typically 480 volts or lower. From there, the transformer feeds into a switchboard. So this switchboard acts as sort of the heart of the distribution system. From there, the switchboard then distributes the power out to all of the lower loads and feeds into devices such as power panel boards or lighting and appliance panel boards. The focus of today's presentation, P2 and P3 panel boards, are lighting and appliance panel boards. And so these in particular will hold overcurrent protection devices that eventually will feed lighting and appliance loads down the line. So now let's see how these P2 and P3 panel boards fit into the greater P-series family that Siemens offers. So with this family, Siemens provides a stepped approach to our panel boards, with stepping from P1 all the way to P5. As you can see off to the left, you typically increase your footprint, and also you increase your ratings available with each one of those panel boards. In particular, let's focus in on our P2 and P3s. So one thing that you can notice is off to the left, the footprint of our P2 panel board is actually the same as our P1s, and that's because they fit into the same families of enclosures. Then as you step up to P3, you get a little bit more of a footprint there because you're also increasing your capabilities, because it is a flexible and innovative panel, but it's really kind of having the power of a small distribution panel. So with that increase in power, you also increase your footprint there. And one thing to also note is typically as you step up in size and the ratings that you're dealing with, your price will also increase as you step up from P1 to P5. But one thing to note is that this is very dependent upon the devices you actually place inside of these panel boards as well, not just the panels themselves. And so here we have a different view of the stepped approach that we offer here at Siemens with our P-series family. As you can see off to the left, we have several different categories defined here, with the first three rows hitting on our dimensions of height, width, and depth that you can see typically increase as you go from left to right. We also have the maximum voltages available, the systems that we have with either 1 or 3 phase in each of these panel boards, and then finally the ratings of both our main devices and our branch devices that we can put in each of these panel boards. And so like I mentioned, typically your ratings and your dimensions will increase as you go from P1 all the way to P5. But today we are focusing on sort of the middle of our category, in particular the lighting panel segments of P2 and P3. So these are the focus of today's presentation. So now that we've covered all of the general topics for these P2 and P3 panel boards, let's start focusing in on each one individually, starting with our P2. First, let's hit on the specifications of our P2 lighting panel, starting with the ratings for our main lug panels. So here we have 125 amps up to 600 amps available in our P2. Then as we go into our main breaker panels, we go up to that same 600 amps, but now we have the ability to go down all the way to 100 amps. Next, our branch devices. We have anywhere between 15 amps to 225 amps available to go into your unit space. And typically these are either BLBQD breakers, XGB, XGB2, or QR breakers. And in the future we're looking at adding in breakers such as 3VA41 and more. And so one cool thing about our P2 is that this is our first ability to mix and match breaker types in our branch unit space. Next on the ratings we have our sub-feed breakers. So we have the ability to go anywhere between 70 amps to 250 amps for our twin mounted breakers, which are typically FD breakers. Then for our single mounted breakers we have 200 amps to 400 amps available, and those are typically JD. In the future we're also looking at incorporating 3VA into these sub-feed breaker areas, and that's our 3VA5, 3VA6, and more that we're looking at. Then the next thing that I want to hit on is our maximum number of circuits in our P2, which can range anywhere between 18 to 90 circuits, and that correlates to having anywhere between 9 to 45 inches of unit space. And you can see here we have all of those increments of 6 inches. So as you jump up to the next size, you're increasing 6 inches in length of your box for your P2. And one other neat feature is that we can include blank unit space if you would like, so that way if you're thinking of expanding in the future, you have the ability to do so. Now moving on to the features of our P2. The biggest one to hit on is now we have the ability to mix breaker frames in the unit space up to 225 amps. And in our sub-feed that can be up to 400 amps. And so this is a big deal because if you look at our P1 panel boards, we typically have to keep all of the breaker frames the same. But if you need to do things such as meet power distribution panel requirements in a small package, where under that situation you need to mix and match breaker frames, you can actually do that with our P2 lighting panels, which is a huge benefit, because if you look at our typical power distribution panel like our P4, which is 10 inches in depth and 32 inches of width, having the ability to have all of those requirements met in a P2 panel board, which is only 20 inches in width and 5.75 inches in depth, you have a huge space savings that you can hit on whenever you're trying to incorporate this into a project. Another nice feature to mention is that we're looking at incorporating our new 3VA thermomagnetic trip and electronic trip breakers in our P2 panels starting in fiscal year 18 to fiscal year 19. Some other things to mention is starting in our P2 lighting panel board in this P-Series family, we start having a variety of enclosures available. So these are the same families of enclosures as our P1 lighting panel board. And so the standard size is 20 inches in width by 5.75 inches in depth. But as you can see here, we have the ability to either increase that width up to 24 inches, or we can increase the depth to 7.75 inches. So that just allows us to be a little bit more flexible with the items that we need to place inside of this panel board. One other neat feature is that Starting with our P2 panel board, we now have more busing options available. So instead of just having the standard busing of aluminum with tin plating, we also have the ability to go and have temperature rated copper, which is tin plated, and we also have the ability to have silver plating, which is nice. Also, we have new options available of 750 amps per square inch aluminum, which is tin plated, or even going up to 1000 amps per square inch copper, which is standardly tin plated, or we also have silver plating optional as well there. Now that we've hit on some of the specifications and features of our P2 panel boards, let's go do the same with our P3 panel boards. First, we can dive into the specifications of these P3s. So if you compare this back to our P2, the biggest difference in your ratings for the main devices at least comes in our main lug panels. So now these range from 250 amps all the way up to 800 amps for these P3s. Our main breaker panels, however, stay the same, 100 amps to 600 amps. Next, moving on to our branch space, we can go anywhere between 15 amps to 250 amps inside of our branch areas, and so these have those same breaker types of BL, BQD, XGB, XGB2, or QR. We also, though, have the ability to have 3VA52 in our branch space for these P3s, which is a nice new benefit. In the future, we're also looking at incorporating our 3VA41 and more. In our subfeed area, we can have twin mounted breakers of FD breakers anywhere between 70 amps to 250 amps. And for our single mounted JD breakers, we have 200 amps to 400 amps available. In the future, we're also looking at adding in 3VA5, 3VA6, and more, just like in our P2 panels. Here you can see that our enclosure heights are a little bit different than what we had before. We have anywhere between 56 all the way up to 80 inches in our enclosures, and our unit space still ranges from 9 all the way up to 45 inches of unit space. And just like before, we have the ability to include blank unit space if you'd like to expand in the future. Now let's dive into the features of this P3 lighting panel board. Although it is technically a lighting panel board, it really is more like a small footprint power distribution panel board. So with that increase in power, we also see an increase in the enclosure sizes. So our standard enclosure footprint for these P3s is 24 inches in width by 7.75 inches in depth. So if you remember back to the P2s, this is the upper end of the range for those enclosures, but that's a standard for our P3s. Also, you can see our enclosure heights go all the way up to 80 inches, so we have the ability to be a little bit larger there as well. Next, moving on to what it's designed for. So these are really panel boards that are designed for applications that require either more or larger branch devices than you would typically find in a lighting panel board. And so with that hitting on what we have the ability to do in here, we have the ability to mix and match breaker frames in our unit space all the way up to 250 amps, up from that 225 amps available in our P2. And so that's big with the new introduction of our 3VA52 launch in fiscal year 18, which we're really excited about, and we'll hit on all of the features and benefits that that brings in the next slide. Just like we mentioned before, we have a large variety of factory assembled options. It's very similar to our P2, so hitting on things such as the additional busing options we have available, and also the ability to include blank unit space for future expansion. All of those are available within our factory assembled options for these P3 panel boards. Now that we've covered some of the initial features and specifications of our P3 lighting panel boards, let's really dive into the benefits of this 3VA52 integration that we mentioned. So with this 3VA52, we're having it available as a twin mount and up to 6 positions. So we're actually able to get this breaker nose to nose within the unit space of a P3 panel board. So what does that actually mean? it means that this P3 is now 480 volt delta capable. And so that correlates to us allowing more configurations to fit a P3 rather than a much larger and more expensive P4 panel. And so not only does this benefit us in terms of a price positioning on each of the projects that we're quoting now, but also it helps us in terms of space savings. So as you can see off to the bottom, we have the standard enclosure dimensions of our P4 versus our P3, and we're seeing a huge reduction in footprint with this new benefit of integrating our 3VA52 breakers. So this will come into play a lot with our future projects. Now that we've mentioned some of the specifications and features of these P2 and P3 panel boards individually, let's hit on some of the common features, starting with the enclosures. So although we have different sizes available, we have the same types available for both these P2 and P3 panel boards. So let's dive into those right now. For starters, we have the NEMA Type 1 enclosure. So these enclosures are constructed for indoor use, primarily to provide a degree of protection of the equipment inside the enclosure against debris such as falling dirt. So this is our standard indoor availability for enclosures with our P2 and P3 panel boards. And as you can see, we have several different options available. So for our P2s, if you want to increase your width from the standard 20 to 24 inches, all you have to do is add a 24 onto that catalog number. We also have the ability to make these painted, so we can paint it with ANSI 61 gray paint. And so to do that, you just have to add a P onto the end of your catalog number there. For our P2s, if you want to increase your depth from 5.75 to 7.75, all you have to do is add a D into your catalog number and then you have it. And so one thing to note though is our standard enclosures are galvanized steel, and the P2 standard does differ from the P3, with the P3 standard enclosures being 7.75 inches in depth and 24 inches in width, while our P2s are 5.75 inches in depth and 20 inches in width as a standard. Next up, we have our NEMA Type 3R enclosures. So these enclosures, while NEMA Type 1 is more for indoor use, the 3Rs are for outdoor use, primarily to provide a degree of protection against rain, sleet, and damage from external ice formation. As you can see here, we have several variations of enclosures available, with our box height ranging from 26 inches all the way up to 74 inches for our P2s. And for our P3s, we range from 56 to 80 inches. Another thing to note is the catalog numbering system follows the same scheme as before. So if you want to increase depth to 7.75 inches, you just add a D into the catalog number. And if you'd like to increase the width from 20 inches to 24 inches, all you have to do is add a 24 to the beginning of your catalog number. And those are for our P1 and P2 enclosures, because our P3, the standard width is 24 inches and standard depth is 7.75 inches. Alright, now let's move on to our NEMA Type 12 or Siemens 3R/12 enclosures. These enclosures are very similar to our Type 3R enclosures in that they're constructed for outdoor use, primarily to provide a degree of protection against rain, sleet, and damage from external ice formation. But one thing that you can notice on the picture off to the right is we have some additional provisions like that gasket around the door, which are made to protect against things such as circulating dust, dripping, and even some light splashing, so adding some extra protection for everything inside the enclosure. In addition to that, as you can see, we have a wide range of options in the same set of offerings as you found on the 3R enclosures. So our height can range anywhere from 26 inches to 74 inches for our P1s or P2s. And for our P3s, your height can range from 56 all the way up to 80 inches. And the catalog numbering scheme is just the same as before, with moving from 5.75 inches to 7.75 inches in depth. You just add on a D to the catalog number, and if you'd like to increase your width to 24 inches, then just add a 24 onto the beginning of the catalog number. One last note though on the differences between 3R/12 and Type 3R enclosures is here at Siemens we treat 3R/12 enclosures as a stock item, while our Type 3R enclosures are a make-to-order item. So what this means to you is if you're working on a project which has some lead time constraints, you'll probably want to stick with these 3R/12 enclosures because they'll be much better on lead time than the make-to-order 3R enclosures. Alright, so now let's move on to our NEMA Type 4 or 4X enclosures. So these are constructed for indoor or outdoor use, primarily to provide a degree of protection against splashing water, corrosion, wind-blown dust and rain, hose-directed water, and even damage from external ice formation. So as you can see here, these have a lot of provisions to protect against a variety of scenarios. And we have 3 different types within this area, which are our NEMA Type 4, the NEMA Type 4X non-metallic enclosures, and the typical NEMA Type 4X enclosures. So as you can see, we have the catalog numbers listed for each one of the different options we have available, and so these are a little bit more specialty, so you'll need to do a little bit more diving into these as you go about your ordering. Next, we can move on to our fronts and trims. So now that we have the boxes taken care of, these are actually what covers those boxes. So to start out, our standard trim is our fast latch trim. And as you can see, we have several different options available for variations on this that we'll hit on here in a second. As was mentioned before, we have our fast latch fronts as a standard. And so these are constructed with 14 gauge standard steel or a UL approved equivalent. And so one neat feature about these is that they have hooks on the bottom of them to really help in terms of installing them. So that's a nice benefit that we tried to include in the design. And one other design feature that we have is there are no screw holes on this front. And so that's completely intentional. So if you go to lock this with a key, then you are the only person who has access to what's inside. No one can come up and unscrew your front and take it off and have access to everything inside. So that's another nice benefit. And finally, we have a few different styles within this fast latch front. One is our flush front, and so that will be flush with the wall that you're trying to put this panel board in. But we also have the surface style of this front, which protrudes from the wall a little bit. One last note is that we have the ability to include metal card holders, and we also have several replacement parts available, which we listed here. A lot of those referring back to those lock and key scenarios. While we do have our standard fast latch fronts, Siemens is really excited to also offer a variety of optional fronts. You can see all of those listed here. So primarily we have 3 different styles. We have screw to box, hinge to box, and door and door, which you can see going from left to right here. And we have all 3 of these options also available with piano hinges. So you can see the catalog numbers in the tables on this chart. One thing I do want to mention though is for our piano hinge options, we do have stainless steel available for stainless 304 as an option. But one thing to note is that stainless 316 is not available for these fronts. And so if you're in an application such as a kitchen or something along those lines where you need stainless 316, we do not have those as an option with our piano hinge fronts. Furthermore, one thing I want to hit on is our P3 fronts are more custom, and they may need a special order or support from the plant to ensure that you can get what your customer requires. So that's an additional note if you're looking for an optional front on a P3 panel board. And finally, we have a wide range of filler plates available. So these filler plates are required for any breaker openings without breakers to meet UL and other safety requirements, whether that be in unit space or the main or subfeed area. Here we have field installable kits available for most filler plates needed in case of loss or damage in the field, as well as the ones that come whenever you're configuring a panel board in Compass. Customer support can also be contacted if needed for any unlisted filler plates that you don't see here. But overall, these are our complete offering of filler plate accessories that we have. As mentioned, customer support can help with any specific additional needs. Along that same line, we have several other accessories available with our P2 and P3 panel boards. We have some of these listed here, but as you can see, there are a lot, so I would recommend checking our SpeedFacts product catalog for a complete offering and details on each one of these accessories. And so later on in our supporting materials slide, we'll explain where to find our SpeedFacts product catalog. I would recommend going through that to check out all of the accessories we have available for you. Now that we've gone over a lot of our different offerings in terms of accessories and our panel board specifications, let's hit on some of the specific requirements that we're trying to meet with these P2 and P3 panel boards. So to start out, we have California Title 24 and other disaggregation solutions, and specific to our P2 panel board. So what exactly is load disaggregation? It's a grouping of all loads of the same type, and it allows for the ability to independently measure and monitor energy usage by each separate load type. So this is a big deal, especially in California, and that's because it allows for energy monitoring for buildings to become more and more efficient. And so that helps customers with their energy savings and having a more positive energy footprint. And so as you can see on the bottom right, we have some of the requirements that we're trying to meet with this special P2 Title 24 panel board. And so now let's move into a little bit more about how we are complying with these restrictions. As you can see here, we have a specified P2 panel board to actually fit these Title 24 requirements. And so our Siemens P2 with load disaggregation features allows up to 400 amps of aluminum or copper bus material, and all of these P2 disaggregation panels actually use this 400 amp bus. We also have several provisions available for current transformers, and so that will help you with actually monitoring the grouped loads that you have. And one nice benefit is that we have our Compass configuration tool, and so that allows you to actually group your breakers when you're forming a P2 panel and looking to order it, so that way you can put specified breakers in set locations, so that way you can split up your loads more along the lines of how you're planning on monitoring them. And then finally, your CT provisions can be placed as needed within the unit space available, including just after the main. So that's a really nice benefit, because that way you have the ability to place and configure your panel board to be custom for the needs that you have. Hit on some of our compliance features regarding our UL 67 compliance. Beginning on January 1st, 2017, enhanced UL 67 safety requirements have taken effect, applying to all panel boards and load centers with service equipment applications. So basically, this addition to the code is explaining what is suitable for use as service entrance equipment. So this part of the code is attempting to reduce the potential for any accidents while actually servicing equipment. What this is telling us is that if a panel board is being serviced, it needs to have barriers in place So a person in the field servicing the equipment cannot make accidental contact to live circuit parts. So Siemens wants to be compliant with this UL 67 code, so we have created several service entrance barrier kits, which you can see below, which allow our panel boards to be suitable for use as service entrance equipment. One important note though is even with these protections, Siemens still recommends turning off and locking out all power supplying these panel boards before working inside them to avoid any potential hazards. As I'm sure you've noticed throughout this brain chart, and also as you can notice from the catalog numbering system off to the left, there are many different options for our P2 and P3 panel boards. As a result, Siemens has created a compass tool, or configure, order, manage, price, and ship, to create a custom P2 or P3 panel board to fit the specific needs of your job. So the way this is designed is for minimal inputs on your end, and it'll create and drive down to the most cost-effective option for the requirements you have on your job. One other note is that we are converting our desktop version, as you can see here, over to an online Compass Go version, which has a great user interface and will be the future of our Compass program. As a result, right now you can configure a P1 panel board in Compass Go, and our P2 and P3 panel boards are soon to follow. Overall, that covers pretty much all the information we want to get you on our P2 and P3 panel boards. Just as a quick recap though, I want to hit on some of the selling features that we're really excited about that are including these P2 and P3 panel boards. First off, both our P2 and P3 are to include Delta rated branches in fiscal year 18, with our P2 and P3 having the XGB2 breaker with a 125 amp max there, and our P3 specifically is getting our 3VA52 nose-to-nose that we mentioned earlier in the presentation, and this allows us to go up to 250 amps as a maximum. So with our P3 having those new 6 large frame breakers in that unit space, we have the ability to have only 6 inches of unit space for each twin mount kit, which is a huge benefit in both the space savings of not having to drive up to a P4 distribution panel like we mentioned earlier. So we have a nice space savings there, but also keeping it in a smaller P3 panel, or even a P2 if you're able to do it with those XGB2 breakers. We have a nice price savings as well. So that really will help us on our positioning on each of the projects that we're looking to configure here in the future. Finally, just as a nice conclusion, we have some supporting material here for you. So if you haven't gotten all the information you want on these P2 or P3 panel boards, or if you'd like more information on other panel boards, we have some supporting material for you. First off is the SpeedFax product catalog that I mentioned. So we have this hosted online at our website, and in particular the section 11 that we have linked here is covering our panel boards. Furthermore, we have our other panel board brain sharks, which will go more in depth into one, just an overview of all of the P series panel boards, and another one hitting on our P1 panel board in specific. Next, we have the Siemens Download Center, which you can find all of the different collateral that we have, whether it be flyers or brochures or selection and application guides. And so you can find those at the Download Center at this link. And then finally, we have our panel boards website for any additional information that you may need for our panel boards. Here we have some additional support information listed. So for customers, distributors, sales, and others that have more technical questions about these panel boards, you can reach out to the following links or the phone numbers listed below, and they will provide support for your technical questions. Also, as you can see in the blue box on the bottom, Compass also has support that you can access, so you can reach them at their own direct support line. In conclusion, we have our support and contact information. Tony Perini is our current lighting panels product manager, so he covers both this P2 and P3 panel board that we covered today, as well as our P1 and column type panel boards C1 and C2. So, if you are not able to find any information that you need from the supporting material or this brain chart, you can always reach out to Tony at his email listed here. That concludes our overview brain chart for P2 and P3 lighting panel boards. I'd like to thank you all for listening and have a great day.